Now we're going to discuss Lesson 2.5, Simplifying Square Roots. And our objective today is that we're going to simplify square roots. I want you to take just a moment to look at the vocabulary, because some of this may be a little different than what you've seen before, because we're talking about the radical symbol. A perfect square means that it's a number times itself. Okay, the product of a number multiplied by itself is that square number, and then the square root. So the number 9, we call it a perfect square because 9 is the result of multiplying the factor 3 2 times. So in other words, there's a number times itself that will give you 9. So that's why it's called a perfect square. If you want to take just a moment, it'd probably be handy for when you're getting ready to work your problems to write down what 2 times 2, 3 times 3, 4 times 4, 5 times 5, so that when you see 2 times 2 and you see 4, you see the number 4, you automatically think, oh, we got a perfect square. The perfect squares are 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, and 144. So if you want to take just a minute to write down what numbers times itself gives you those numbers. I'll say them again. 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100, 121, and 144. Those are the ones you're going to use the most. Okay. Now the inverse of squaring a number is finding the square root of that number. And so the symbol, this radical symbol, denotes taking the square root. So when we see plus or minus square root of 9, the answer is going to be plus or minus 3 because 3 squared is equal to 9 and the negative 3 squared also equals 9. A radical is not simplified if there are any perfect square factors of the number under the radical sign. So let's look at square root of 18. Well, we know the factors of 18 are 2 and 9, right? I always look for one of those perfect squares. That's why it's good to have them written down. Is it divisible by 4 or 9 or 16 or 25 or 36? You keep going until you see if it's a factor of one of those perfect squares. Then you're going to write it as the factor of those perfect, or those the factors under the radical sign. Excuse me. So this means the same thing as this. We can put them under their in their own house. Square root of 9 times square root of 2. Well, the square root of 9 is 3. And we can't break down the square root of 2 anymore, so we have 3 times the square root of 2. Now these numbers are not simplified. 45 and square root of 45 and square root of 24. But these are square root of 3 and square root of 30. There are no perfect squares that come out of these two. But there are perfect squares that can come out of square root of 45 and square root of 24. 45 is 9 times 5. Or square root of 9 times square root of 5, which is 3 radical 5. 24 is 4 times 6. So square root of 4 times square root of 6, which is 2 square root of 6. Now square root of 16 represents the positive square root of 16, or 4. And this means the opposite of the square root of 16. It represents the negative square root of 16, or negative 4. So plus or minus the square root of 16 represents both the positive and the negative. So it depends on what they're asking you and how they set up the original equation as to what your answer is going to be. So if you don't see any sign out, it's just going to be the positive number. If you see only a negative out front, then your answer is going to be negative. Or if you see the plus minus, then when you give your answer, you're going to say plus or minus 4. So let's take a look at what that resembles. Simplify plus or minus the square root of 36. So what number times itself will give you 36? Why, 6 will, but also a negative 6 will. And the reason you need to look at the negative is because it says plus or minus. The sign before the radical means both the positive and the negative square root, so you have to list plus or minus 6. Now it's your turn. I want you to simplify the opposite of the square root of 49. So pause the video for a moment, then come back and we'll go over your answers. Okay, what number times itself equals 49? That's what goes here. Why, 7 does. But looking at this, Negative 7 does as well. So the sign before the radical means the negative square root. So the opposite of the square root of 49 is negative 7. Okay, let's look at another one. 40 is divisible by the perfect square 4. So we can write that as 4 times 10. So write the square root of 40 as a product. Square root of 4 times the square root of 10, which will be 2 square root of 10. Now, it's your turn. We were to simplify the square root of 75. So pause for a moment, then come back and turn on the video and we'll go over that. Okay, 75 is divisible by the perfect square 25. So 75 is equal to 25 times 3. So we can put a 24 under this radical sign and a 3 under this radical sign. So square root of 25 is 5 square root of 3. All right, good job. Now time for a little guided practice. I want you to pause the video and work these problems, then you can come back and check your answers. Okay, I want you to take just a moment to check your answers. If you got some wrong, why did you miss it? Did you remember to put plus or minus on this one because your original started plus or minus? Did you remember to put a negative 4 because your original was asking for the opposite? Notice these are only the positive roots. This one's asking for the negative. Negative. Plus or minus. Positive only. Okay, good job. So we'll go on to the next phase. Okay, time for us to do a little step-by-step practice. Simplify the square root of 153. So pause the video for a moment, and I want you to study this for a minute, and then we'll come back and check the answers. How'd you do? Well, 153 is divisible by the perfect square 9 because 153 is 9 times 17. These a little bit larger numbers than we're used to, so that's why sometimes you have to go through and check your perfect square numbers. If you've got it written down, it'll help you out. So we can rewrite this as the square root of 9 times the square root of 17, which is 3 radical 17, or square root of 17. All right, here are some more practice problems. I want you to work through these and then come back in a little bit and we'll check your answers. So how'd you do? I'm going to let you pause the video for a moment so you can double check your answers. Make sure that when you have just a positive original, your answer is positive. Plus or minus, you have a plus or minus. A negative, you have a negative. So once you find your answer, what I do is I go back and look really quick at my original. That can solve you some problems and give you more points because you haven't missed those little bitty things that you need to pay attention to. You know we're getting close to the end of the video when it's time for step-by-step problem solving practice. So I want you to pause the video, read through the problem, and fill in the blanks, and then you can come back here in a little bit and turn on the video and check your answers. Okay, take a look. How'd you do? Did you get that the shape of the yard is in a square? So you're going to find the square root of 196. So it equals 14. 14 times 14 is 196. That's a number we don't use a whole lot, but you could add it. Add 13 and 14 to your list of perfect squares that you have written down. You had to do a little guess and check, didn't you? Because you weren't quite for sure, probably you didn't have it memorized exactly what the perfect square was. So there you go, guys. You're ready to start your practice.